How you doing, Jay Birmingham?
Hi, Jim. It's great to see you.
Yes, it's great to get on here. I absolutely loved your chapter. I couldn't wait to, we've met each other over a couple Zoom calls in our USA Crosser group, but really looking forward to getting to know you better. I'm so impressed with your running history. You've kind of made a career out of it. So Jay is one of 27 ultra runners who have consolidated their chapters. We each wrote a chapter on our walk or our run across America. And Jay's chapter is the third chapter. So we're going to ask Jay some questions about his run across country. So to get started with, Jay, what in the world made you think about running across America? How did you come up with that idea?
Well, I've been a bit of a historian of running. And one of the things that popped up when I was in high school was this Bunyan Derby, two races that were run in 1928 and 1929. First one was LA to New York, and the second one was New York to LA. And they've since a number of people have written really nice books about that, but it was just an idea. In 1964, I was a freshman in college, and I was living in Dayton, Ohio, and I saw a little article in the paper, and anything about running was kind of a surprise. And it said South African runner passing through Upper Sandusky on the way to New York. And that was the first time I'd ever even thought about, my goodness, this guy has run all the way across, and now he's in Ohio. Maybe I should drive up and meet him. I never did that, but a few days later, he finished. And then Runner's World actually Runner's World wasn't in business until a few years later, 3 years later. But Long Distance Log was mentioned that since 1929, someone has finally run across the United States. Well, I was just a college athlete. I wasn't in a serious program, but I was in pretty good shape. And I started to run marathons my senior year of college. And I got real serious about marathons. I ran one or two, sometimes three a year, always pushing the PR to run a new personal best. And I thought maybe I could make the Olympic trials. And initially I thought I could make the Olympic team, but reality hit me. And I thought, well, if I could just make it to the Olympic trials, that would really be awesome. So I got my time down under in the low 240s, and I was a serious runner. I trained pretty hard. I wasn't coached by anybody, just what I read. But I decided to give it one last shot, and in 1976, and I ended up running a PR 241 at the national championships, but I was like in 56th place or something. And that's when I started to think about, well, you're never going to be an Olympian. You're not going to make the Olympic trials. Maybe you could do something longer. And I had since run a 50 miler or a few 50 Ks. And I corresponded with Ted Corbett, who is often called the father of American ultra marathoning. He held most of the records in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he actually gave me some advice, and he said he knew dozens of people in New York City alone who talk about doing a transcontinental but never get started. And he said, if you can see your way clear with job and other obligations, he urged me to go ahead and do it. So that was the kick I needed to actually make it happen. I was teaching school. I was running I was, of course, coaching. And I had a little running store, very minimal running store, nothing very fancy, part of the Fidipodes group. And so I had to do it during the summer. And so in 1977, I attempted to run across the country. But in about 7 or 8 days, I'd broken down. I had a support vehicle the first time. And we had a little bit of financial backing, and I had a 2-person crew. So we went back to the desert for 10 days, and I restarted after 10 days. But instead of learning a lesson from my too ambitious approach, I broke down in only 2 days. So I went back home to Ohio, and I took my friends home to Ohio and came back to Florida and became a normal runner again for a while. But 3 years later, again, corresponding with Ted Corbett, he said, have you ever considered doing it Don Shepard's way? Well, Shepard was the guy back in '64 who ran LA to New York with a little backpack. And he basically winged it every day. He didn't know where he was going to end up, but he would head east. And he stayed in various people's garages and barns and was invited indoors most of the time. And he stayed in cheap motels. And I thought, man, that's just like training every day. I think I might be able to do that. So that was how I decided in 1980 to do it solo.
That is mind-boggling to me. And when I ran across in 2002, I didn't even think about doing it solo. That was not even an option. I know a whole lot of you guys have, but from what I understand, your run, it was LA to New York, correct, Jay?
Yes, I wanted to do the same route that both Tulla and Shepard had done, plus the Bunyan Derby guys in 1928.
Yeah,
where 55 people did that.
And your run still holds the record for solo crossing with a backpack. Is that correct?
Well, as far as I know, the site that John Wallace kept going up through 2012 or 2014, and I haven't seen an update of that since,
right.
Even though I keep checking. But he ranks or he categorizes people by solo runner, solo walker, accompanied, unsupported, and so on. For example, Jim Shapiro, who was mentioned yesterday in one of your interviews, he mentions me in his book, but he was listed as partially supported because until he got across the desert in Nevada, he had somebody looking out for him. And then he was on his own from there on, from, I think, Las Vegas eastward. But anyway, I'm not comfortable with calling it a record because there's so many variables.
Right. Well, I got to ask you just another question about that, because to those of us who ran supported, which was tough enough, it's mind-boggling. Pushing a baby stroller is mind-boggling in itself, but you did not have a baby stroller. If you don't mind me asking, because a lot of people who read our book and some who watch these videos, I'm on a motion detector light here. So some are going to wonder, how in the hell did you possibly pack everything? Just give us an idea. You don't have to tell us everything, but you couldn't have put a tent in that, or did you? Did you actually have a tent in the backpack? What did you have in there?
Just the gear I needed to get to the next town. And I didn't really plan my motels or where I was going to stay in advance, but I knew I couldn't go 60 miles between two towns. So I had to make sure that, it's almost impossible to plan it rigidly unless you're very conservative. And I wanted to beat Shepard's record, which was 73 days and 8 hours. So,
so you had to spend some nights outside. You couldn't have found a motel.
I spent 2 nights outside. I spent a lot of nights in cheap motels. And what I didn't realize, by keeping witness signatures, which the Guinness people have always suggested if you're doing something that's hard to monitor, by asking people to give you a witness signature, they say, well, who's with you, or where do you spend the night? And I realized very quickly that was a magical question. And I could say, well, I hope to make it to, let's say, Globe, New Mexico by nightfall. Can you suggest any place I could stay? And sometimes they would suggest a motel, but sometimes they would say, well, I've got a cousin that lives in Globe. Let me call them. Now, this was back in the day with no cell phones. So everyone
no cell phones and no internet.
Right. People had to go back home or go to a phone booth. And that's what I did. I went to payphones all the time to stay in touch with my wife and 3 kids back home and the press back in Jacksonville, Florida. But anyway, that witness card thing really worked great.
And how old were you at the time?
34. I turned 35 just 3 days before I finished.
I really enjoyed your chapter because of all the chapters I've read so far, and I've read almost all of them, yours is the only one we ran at least out west, partially out west. We were on the same routes. You mentioned Very Large Array, and you mentioned
Yeah,
Pie Town. Wasn't Pie Town a joy to run up that hill and reach the
yeah.
Continental Divide, and a
I,
couple miles later, there's Pie Town. Explain what Pie Town is for people who may not know.
well, it's a little village in New Mexico on the Continental Divide, and they pride themselves on homemade pie. So I spent the night in Pie Town, a real derelict motel, but it was cheap, and I got a piece of pie as soon as I arrived, and another piece of pie later. I don't remember what else I ate that day.
I ate a whole
But then,
pie when I was in Pie Town.
oh, you did?
I ate
Wow.
an entire pie. I did, yes.
Wow.
And then
Yeah.
Amarillo too. You also ran through Amarillo, and
Yes.
you are still running. You were telling me you've been like a cross country coach most of your career.
Yes. Cross country and track. I coach all track events as well.
And you're still running. You're running every day at 75.
Yes.
You're 75 years old now.
I will be in July. I'm 74 now.
Wow, incredible.
But since I retired from teaching a year ago, my training's taken an uptick, and I'm back running some short ultras. I've got a 50-miler scheduled in the Florida Keys in May. And then I told you about the Artsakh Ultra, which is a 6-day, 160-mile stage race in the Republic of Artsakh, which is next to Armenia. So I'm getting serious about my running again.
Wow, that's just phenomenal. And you and I have something else in common, that originally you're just 45 miles up the road from me. I live just south of Cincinnati, and you're from Wilmington, Ohio.
Right. My first track club was the Ohio Valley Track Club out of Cincinnati. And we would drive down there to run road races and cross country meets with a bunch of other old runners who were all college graduates.
Well, there are a lot. You have a lot of your chapter is awesome. You got a lot of stories in there. But if I could ask you, what is the one day, either positive or negative, what stands out in your mind from your run across America?
The most memorable day was the day. It's also in New Mexico, a little one-building town called Blue Springs. And apparently at one point it had a restaurant and a motel, but I ended up at the end of about a 42-mile day, and the next town was 14 miles up the road, and I just didn't have the desire to go and end up in the dark. And I always ran in the daylight. I never wanted to take a chance on becoming injured, which I did, by the way. Anyway, back at Blue Springs, the Hispanic lady who ran the place, she fed me chili, which was just incredibly spicy. And I'm a real weakling when it comes to spicy food. And she could see the tears rolling down my face. So she just, the next bowl of chili had no pimiento in it. She told her mother, Mama, no pimiento. And then I said, is there any place I could stay here? She says, oh no, the motel's closed. And the motel was just a shack behind the saloon and restaurant. It was really not a restaurant, it was a saloon. And I went out and tried to catch a ride into Mountain Air, which is 14 miles east. And then I would, of course, come back to that point the next morning. Well, nobody slowed down. Everyone was going by at about 50, 60 miles an hour. And so I came back, and the lady actually flagged me back in. Her last name was Miranda. And Senorita Miranda said, Senor, come back in. She said, maybe we can let you stay in the motel. So I walked through this beaded curtain out behind the saloon, and she's got this key on the end of a rubber band, and posted on the wall of this building, it says, condemned, state of New Mexico. So she opens this padlock and brushes away the cobwebs. This is very, very memorable. And she goes to the second room in there and unfolds this old steel roll-away bed. And she said, this is where you can stay if you don't mind. And I said, fine. Yeah. She said, could you pay me $2? I said, yeah, sure. So I went back inside, I don't drink much beer, but that's pretty much all they had to drink. And I had more potato chips and stuff like that, and went back out there, and I shivered through the night, but I got through the night. Next morning, I ran to Mountain Air and had 2 breakfasts. I remember
Awesome.
as soon as I got there having 2 breakfasts, but that was my night in Blue Springs. And it's now
I
not
ran
even,
through Blue Springs. I sure did on the same route. Yeah.
it,
Hey,
it's not even on the maps now. That I can't find a map that shows it.
one more quick question. Did you take any rest days? And like, what was your shortest day, your longest day, mileage wise, and what was your average miles per day?
Okay, shortest day was a 0 in Amarillo. I'd actually gone a day and a half east of Amarillo, and a guy that I met who also had a running store, his wife came and got me because I had injured my shin in Tucumcari, New Mexico. And I'd limped along for about a week, and it was getting worse and worse. So this guy who was a track club member took me to his orthopedist, and the guy says, I think you've got a stress fracture. You should just take some time off. So I took one day off, and that was an 11-mile day, and then the day off. And then I built a little orthotic for myself out of insole material. And I got a ride back out to the little town of Groom, Texas, and I resumed my run. And I had fallen about 2 days behind the pace that I thought I needed to break that 63 days, 8 hours. But when I got to Indiana and Ohio and Pennsylvania, I was clicking along 50-mile days. My longest day was 59.
With a backpack. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, but it wasn't a heavy backpack, Jim. It was
Yeah,
just
but not
minimal
only that,
stuff.
but see, you had to carry water too, you know? And,
Yeah, but uh, I realized once I got in the eastern half of the
right.
USA, I can go half a day without water. I don't baby myself with thinking I got to drink water all the time. It's what I carried in my backpack more than anything else was 4 or 6 cans of Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
Somebody yesterday talked about drinking milk. I drank Mountain Dew like it was water. And Mountain Dew tasted okay when it was hot, whereas Coca-Cola, Pepsi, no.
And certainly not
So
milk when it's hot.
no, that was sour.
Well, Jay, what an awesome chapter. People will enjoy reading it. Your chapter number 3. They're in chronological order. The book is Across America on Foot. It is going to be available here on Amazon sometime in March. So everybody's going to enjoy your chapter. I don't know when or where, but I'm sure we'll all get together at some point and have some type of reunion, Jay. But what a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you, Jim. And
Thank you.
congratulations to you on yours.
Yeah, you have a great day. I look forward to meeting you.
Thank you.